All right, welcome to Halitics. Actually, starting a little bit early, given that countdown should have been 10 seconds later, but that's because I started the theme music that F-U-R, which means four in German, für Elise. It was obviously something Beethoven wrote for someone, I guess a woman, named Elise. It is the free-for-all today, Friday, 240-242-5646. Hope you'll join me. And let's start with more on that terrible plane crash, that collision over the Potomac River a couple of evenings ago. Trump weighing in. Now, I said in the caption calling this, for the description of the program, I said avoidable plane crash was the lead. And Trump, I guess, agrees with me. He provides an explanation, what he thinks, I guess, was the cause. So let's play it. Now, this program, I really try to be as fair as possible to everybody, to not pull punches, but also not to go after people based on hyper-partisanship. And I think I pretty much meet that standard better than just about anybody out there. I will pat myself on the back. I used to sometimes tease my kids if they would tell me how great they did something. Sometimes I would say, oh, everybody loves a bragger, depending on the circumstances, of course. I mean, something want to tell me something you did that you're really proud of is great, but it just depends on the circumstances. So I'll brag a little bit. Yeah, I think I do a better job than just about anybody out there trying to call balls and strikes. I know other folks will say they do that, and maybe they do. I'm not sure if I buy it. Here's Trump, where he's going to get it like totally wrong about why that collision occurred. Before I play it, though, just want to remind you, when you watch Halitics, the best thing you can do, at least from my perspective, at least as far as I'm concerned, is to subscribe if you haven't already done so. Also would urge you to click like in the bottom right of your screen. You can also join me on Halitics. Let's see, we've got our little Facebook gift there. Want more? Yeah, I hope you do join Halitics on Facebook. It's really the best way, I think, to stay connected and be part of the dialogue, because that's what we're trying to do here, have a real dialogue about how we can address the serious, often truly existential crises that we face, and they're not getting any better. I can promise you that. They haven't in the past 4 years, in many ways gotten worse. And I don't know, could I say I'm cautiously optimistic about Trump? I heard a discussion with, was it Ryan Grimm was talking to, I guess, a Palestinian journalist or an Arab journalist, and he said, yeah, there's some glimmers in Trump's Middle East policy that make you feel like things might get better. And there's plenty of reasons not to be optimistic also. Here's Trump, though, on that plane collision.
We must have only the highest standards for those who work in our aviation system. I changed the Obama standards from very mediocre at best to extraordinary.
All right, so remember when I said, hey, everybody loves a bragger? Well, obviously, Trump buys into that. He's telling us how great he changed, his change of the air traffic controller standards were from that of the Obama administration. It was apparently just anybody could just walk in, kind of like applying for a job at McDonald's before Trump took office. And he made sure that every air traffic controller was extraordinary. At least that's how he tells it. This has been widely viewed as an attack on DEI. He sort of talks about DEI a little bit. It's more just the implication, right, is that the requirements for the position, which I think we all agree is very important, air traffic controller, people's lives, hundreds of lives, thousands of lives every day are in the hands of these air traffic controllers. And we certainly want people with good vision, good judgment, experience, and intelligence doing these jobs. And Trump is telling us that's not what we got under his predecessor or his successor. More from Trump.
The highest aptitude, they have to be the highest intellect, and psychologically superior people were allowed to qualify for air traffic controllers. That was not so prior to getting there. When I arrived in 2016, I made that change very early on because I always felt this was a job that, and other jobs too, but this was a job that had to be superior intelligence. And we didn't really have that, and we had it. And then when I left office and Biden took over, he changed them back to lower than ever before.
All right, so I was going to stop it anyway, but so that's from the Washington Post. And it's just complete nonsense. It's hogwash. You know, I often hear people say, oh, Trump's just a liar. Or how do you know he's lying? Well, his lips are moving. I think that maybe is a little too strong, but that's just all a load of crap. I mean, I questioned even playing it because, you know, they say, and it's true, if you broadcast a lie, even when you point out it's a lie, people believe it, right? That, you know, you can say, well, I'm going to tell you something that isn't true, and then they'll believe it, even though you told them it's not true. Even if you can prove it's not true, people will still believe the lie. So you worry about it. But on the other hand, if I'm going to sit here and attack Trump for being dishonest, then I have to present to you the evidence that he's dishonest. And just quoting a newspaper article doesn't do it. You got to hear him say it, or the article could be false, right? And often they are. There's lots of criticism of Trump. I think I played some videos there. By the way, sorry about that. Yeah, trying to keep that. I don't know why it's doing that. It shouldn't have boosted that audio. But anyway, if you heard a double audio for a second, I'm not gonna edit that out because I caught it so quickly. In any event, there's been plenty of criticism of Trump that hasn't really been fair. And I pointed out where it isn't fair, where the media says things that he said or they misrepresent, you know, they take words, specific words. I guess it was that whole discussion of Guantanamo Bay earlier this week, where the New York Times said he's going to put 30,000 migrants there. And then they put in quotes criminal criminal immigrants or something. And the quotes almost made you think that it was like a falsity by Trump. Like he's just saying, oh, they're criminal, but they really aren't, according to the Times. But that wasn't Trump's gist at all. Trump's gist was, hey, there's some really bad, really dangerous people who come across into this country illegally, and they should be we need to warehouse them somewhere. And that, I don't agree with what his plan is. I think it's a bad plan, but it was clear the New York Times was doing their utmost to misrepresent what he actually said. So if I'm going to criticize what Trump says, I'm going to show you exactly what he says. And what he just said is false. He didn't change anything from Obama or Biden. And the standards to be an air traffic controller are fine. The problem isn't the standards. It's just not accurate. There's no reason to believe. I mean, maybe there's a problem with standards. I shouldn't say that with absolute certitude. But there's a much more obvious explanation, or there are two actual explanations that go together, two factors that together made that collision, that mid-air collision between the American Air Eagle flight and the helicopter, the military helicopter, really inevitable. This was going to happen. And it's not because of, I don't know, some posting on a website that said, yeah, we welcome folks with disabilities to apply. So according to CBS News, and I have zero reason to question their accuracy here, before, during, and after Trump's first term, when he said he improved the policies, the FAA had the exact same hiring procedures. They recruited, or at least they looked for folks who had certain disabilities. And there's a reason actually for that, because they wanted military people who had experience maybe in the Air Force, who might have been injured and were having trouble finding jobs. So they're like, okay, hey, we've got people who served in the military. They might have had an injury, a job-related injury. Maybe they were wounded, whatever. And they may be looking for a job. Well, we want them to know that this is a good spot for them, the FAA, which makes perfect sense. You're sitting up in that tower. You don't need to be physically active. You don't need to have a lot of strength. 240-242-5646 if you want to join me. It makes perfect sense, right, to recruit the people with disabilities who had served in the military, and that's what the FAA was trying to do. And if you found that there was maybe like someone who had visual impairment, well, I don't think they're going to be hired, because you need to be able to see really, really well. There was no change under Trump when it came to that policy. And in fact, one program that the FAA launched while Trump was president was looking for these, as I mentioned, veterans for careers in air traffic operations. By the way, it's a good idea. I mean, Trump deserves credit for that. He shouldn't be running away from it. He should be saying, hey, this is a good thing I did to help veterans who might have been injured in certain ways. According to the National Air Traffic Controllers Association head or chair, whatever the title is, he praised his people, his folks, and rightfully so. His point is, hey, these air traffic controllers, far from being less qualified or underqualified, as Trump claims, they do amazing work every day keeping us safe while we're in the air. And it's true. I mean, when you think of all the traffic, how many vehicles are in the skies, is it a surprise? Again, it's the only surprise is there aren't more collisions, more crashes, more deaths. The Washington Post gives you the explanation for that terrible, terrible collision. They make it very, very clear exactly what happened, why it happened, and it's something that Trump could do something about, but he won't. I would be shocked because it completely conflicts with his governing ideology. Quite simply put, they were understaffed. There were 2 controllers in the booth when there should have been 4. I mean, it's just that simple. You have 2 folks looking out into the skies at night where there's a lot of light pollution. There's all different sources. You have to be judging distances. You have to be judging altitude. That I know they have the radar and all that they use to judge where the flights are, but still you're looking at something that's 2-dimensional versus 3, and you have to put that together in your mind. Well, and there were, again, instead of the 4 on duty, there were only 2. So it's very, very worrisome, right? Very, very troubling that happened. And the Post goes on to explain that they reviewed this report. Yeah, as I mentioned, 2 folks handling the job of 4. There's supposed to be at least 4 through 9:30 p.m. The crash occurred at 8:50, the tragedy. They note, and this is something that I was thinking about when my wife was discussing this yesterday, you have 100 helicopters a day, over 100 helicopters a day, zipping around and underneath arriving and departing airline flights. There's military base, military airport as well in that area. This seems like insanity to me. You can't have those helicopters zipping around anywhere but above and below those planes. It just seems insane to me. But maybe there's no other option. But then why would you, if you're going to have that much air traffic at a very busy major metropolitan airport, wouldn't you think the solution would not be that what you would not do is increase flights into that airport? And wouldn't you also think that you would make sure you're fully staffed? That wasn't done. We don't know why. They don't tell you. Was it sick leave? Was it budget cuts? Was this a regular occurrence that the helicopter controller was doubled up, that role was doubled up before 9:30 when the number of vehicles or vessels or planes in the air is dropped? Do they routinely do this? I guess we'll find out. I hope we do. But that's the reason this happened. So you have too few air traffic controllers, and at the same time, you have more and more planes in the air. From the New York Times, lawmakers repeatedly added flights despite fears of delays and accidents. Both parties are complicit. This is a really scary story. Congress repeatedly voted to increase the number of daily flights into Reagan National from the year 2000. It was because they fly, it's easiest for them. Nationals, and I think I mentioned this earlier this week, I flew into and out of National this past Saturday and Sunday. It is super convenient, no question about it. I'm not going to do that anymore. Dulles Airport's a little further for me. It's about 35, 40-minute drive versus under a half hour. And it's big. It's pain. It's pain to navigate. Parking is far from the terminal. There's a lot of issues at Dulles that make it less convenient, especially if it's just a weekend trip, right? The parking is more expensive at Reagan National, because it's so convenient. But otherwise, it makes so much more sense to fly out of National for me. And even more so for those lawmakers, because National is very close to the Capitol Hill, and Dulles is quite a bit further. But Dulles is in a flat field, right? It's basically just acres and acres of fields. There's no big buildings. There's no other airfield around there that I'm aware of anyway. It's totally flat. There's no river. It's so much obviously easier. I mean, you can feel it when you approach. I know nothing about flying, but I can see it's easier. It's safer. So that's where I'm flying from now on. But Congress can continue to add on and add on. And in a world where there was justice, some sort of rough crew justice, then maybe there would have been some Congress members on that plane instead of skaters, ice skaters, folks who were visiting family in Kansas and others. There were some lawmakers who didn't vote to increase the number of flights. If you look at the actual votes, the New York Times gives it to you. It was totally bipartisan, 88-4 in the Senate, and then in the House, 387-26. So basically, virtually all the Democrats and all the Republicans are actually responsible for this crash. Because if you want to blame someone, blame the people who put more and more flights in the air. And also, did they adequately fund the FAA? I'm interested. I don't think the Department of Transportation oversees the FAA, but maybe they do. I think was Norman Mineta, they call it Norman Mineta Airport out in San Jose. He was, I believe, under HW, the Secretary of Transportation. Maybe it was under W. In any event, I'm not clear whether the Secretary of Transportation is responsible for that. But that would have been, so it would be, right? So Mineta was the Secretary of Transportation under W. I got that wrong, not HW. Should have known that. Buttigieg was the Secretary of Transportation under the most recent confirmed Secretary of Transportation. There's an acting one under Trump. So I would like to know, what did Buttigieg say about funding if he's responsible. He's made some statements critical of Trump, saying the whole idea that this is diversity, equity, and inclusion is to blame, is absurd, is poppycock. And he's right. He's totally right. But I'd like to know where he comes down on the question of staffing and funding. Was there enough money? Why wasn't there? Whose fault is it if there wasn't, sufficient backups to make sure you always had the requisite number of controllers in the tower? And I would note that Trump doesn't talk about any of that. Trump doesn't say we're going to find out if there was enough funding. We're going to find out. If somebody made a terrible blunder and told someone to go home because they had a cough and didn't make sure they had a backup. All right. I said not every lawmaker voted in favor of the expansion. The only lawmakers that I can find who voted against them, and this is according to the New York Times, I didn't do a deep dive. Okay, I'll be honest with you. But the New York Times makes it clear that the local senators and most of the local House members did vote against the expansion. Now, you might say, oh, well, then they're better, right? Maryland is better, Virginia is better, at least when it comes to this issue. And Tim Kaine has repeatedly said, he's the U.S. Virginia, one of the senior senator from Virginia, the junior being Mark Warner. Tim Kaine has repeatedly warned of the risks that this could happen because of increased traffic at an airport with a short runway, over a river, with lots and lots of both planes flying in and out, as well as other vessels in the air. So he has made that clear. Now you'd say, well, okay, so Kaine gets, to say, I told you so, and he does. And Maryland lawmakers can say the same thing. But the problem with giving them too much praise is it's no skin off their nose. They're not flying to National to get to work, right? Virginia's right across the river. I don't think maybe Tim Kaine had to fly in from Richmond now and again, but most likely he didn't. Most likely he would take a train or he would drive. I would hope he didn't drive, because that drive is going to take you 5 hours to go about 120 miles. 240-242-5646 if you want to join me on this Friday free for all. Basically, no heroes. Trump taking the low road, trying to gin up his base and somehow say, oh, well, we shouldn't have been making it too easy for these disabled people to get jobs, right? We were giving a preference to incompetent, underqualified, disabled people rather than healthy, strong Americans who can do the job. That's his kind of the shtick he's trying to put out there. And it's just a load of crap. It's garbage. It's BS. And it makes it harder for us to address, or impossible, because the real problem is understaffing and too many planes in the air. And to address those problems would gore rich men's oxen, right? Because Congress, rich men, powerful men and women in Congress, they want more flights. They want to be able, I remember going over to National and filming Kirsten Sinema flying in from Arizona. At least in LaGuardia, which is another dangerous airport in New York, in Queens, they have a limit. You can't have a plane that flies more than 1,500 miles. You can't have a route more than 1,500 miles into LaGuardia. So that does keep the flights a little bit reduced in total number, and also the size of the planes. So there's that, which is an advantage because the bigger planes need a longer runway. So there is that at LaGuardia, which is still a dangerous airport, and there are crashes there, as I understand. But Sinema's flying in from Phoenix. That's 2,000 miles away, if I did my math, something like that, 1,800 miles. It's over 1,500, I'm pretty sure. So that is just a bad airport. But if you want to make it easy on yourself, you don't want to have to figure out how to get into downtown from Dulles, well, you'll vote for many more flights into an overcrowded airport with limited runway space. It's terrible. We're not well served by Congress. I think Tulsi Gabbard should be confirmed as Defense Department of National Intelligence, Director of National Intelligence. I always have trouble with that, DNI, Director of National. I think she should be confirmed. I think she's a good choice. I was on a call. Is she perfect? No. Is anybody perfect? No. Is she better by an order of magnitude than Biden's choice, who I, by the way, didn't even know her name. I had to look her up, and I didn't know if she was any good until I did my research. There's no question. Tulsi should be confirmed. I was thinking about this when I was on a call with Progressive Democrats of America, and they called for their audience to let their senators know they oppose every single Trump appointee, no matter what. They're all terrible. You got to vote no on all of them. And it was clearly just partisan. And I'm disappointed because I would like to talk to the person who gave that advice, but they won't talk to me. But I'd like to talk to them and say, well, what is it exactly about Tulsi that you don't like? Because it seems to me her record is exactly what we want. Now, again, not perfect, but in a Director of National Intelligence, she has stood up. She has spoken truth to power in her career over and over. She has served our nation in the military. There's no possible question that I'm aware of any kind of corruption. She is the right choice, and I find it absolutely disgusting the way she's likely to be torpedoed by Democrats and Republicans, and that progressives are perfectly good with this. It's really, really horrific. All right, don't forget, click that like. There's the little thumbs up. Don't forget, I showed you the FB GIF. And also, I will do a subscribe. I don't want to lose my OVO. I want to do that. So I'll also do a quick subscribe now as well. I have to do it this way. 240. Oh, I got my like and my, let's get rid of the like. There we go. Just subscribe now. Here is Michael Bennett. I used to get accused, or I was accused in a former life when I was doing radio, that I was too pompous about having attended Wesleyan University, which is not the most well-known college by far. It doesn't resonate like Harvard, Yale, or Stanford, but I had and still have a lot of pride in my alma mater, nevertheless. I'll just point out that, yes, Michael Bennett did attend my alma mater. He is a Wesleyan University graduate, and his father, Doug Bennett, and I believe his father's name is Michael Douglas Bennett, and Michael Bennett's real name is Douglas Michael Bennett, so each just goes by their middle name, or maybe I have it reversed. I'm not sure, but I know that the senator from Colorado, who you can see his hands apart, we'll play his clip in just a moment, he goes by Michael Bennett, and I'm not sure if it's Michael Douglas or Douglas Michael, I don't know, one or the other. Here he is questioning Tulsi Gabbard.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I would like to repeat my colleague's question to you. Thank you for being here. To answer these questions and for your service. Was Edward Snowden a traitor to the United States of America?
Now, it's such a strange question, right? Like, was he a traitor? I mean, I guess I kind of get it. You're just really trying to nail down her support, the positive things she said about him. Was he a traitor? But it's just like you're trying to just come up with a smear word, right? You're not actually into a discussion. You're not having a conversation. Did Michael Bennett do our nation a service? I'm sorry. No, Michael Bennett is not doing our nation a service with that question. But you could ask this question like, well, what was good? What good came out of it? Because you said some pretty positive, complimentary things about Edward Snowden, who is a whistleblower, who revealed ultimately to Wikipedia the NSA spying program. He was working, I believe, for NSA, and he said, hey, this is wrong. We're doing all this wiretapping, and we don't have legal authority to do it. And people don't know, of course, that we're listening in. And this violates the Constitution against unreasonable searches and seizures. So without warrant, unwarranted, warrantless. That's the word. So you could ask and you'd say, well, did he hurt our country or didn't he? Did he put our service people at risk? Did he put us in danger? All of those, I think, are fair questions. But to just simply say, well, was he a traitor or wasn't he? It's such a gotcha question, and it's so designed to put her on the spot rather than to shine light in the darkness. So immediately I'm pissed off at Bennett for that question. But let's continue.
Senator, I will also repeat my answer. He broke the law.
You said earlier that you were...
By the way, it's very far from clear that he broke the law, that Edward Snowden broke the law. There are protections for whistleblowers. They are not considered to have broken the law if they expose government wrongdoing. And in certain cases, yes, you do have to go to your superiors. You do have to go up the chain of command. You can't just go to the New York Times, or in this case, WikiLeaks, and say, this is what our government is doing. It's illegal. Here's the evidence. But that's not what Edward Snowden did. Edward Snowden did go up the chain of command. He did tell his superiors. He kept going. He was told to shut up and keep his nose to the grindstone. So I don't even accept what Gabbard just said there, that Snowden violated the law. But okay, she's doing it because she wants to be confirmed. And yeah, maybe Paris is worth the mass in this case. I'm not going to scold her for that.
By a question that my colleague from Kansas asked, which I think was his duty as somebody on this committee to fulfill his responsibility to advise and consent. We are not here to be a rubber stamp for the President of the United States. So let me ask you again.
I mean, what a jerk, huh? Right? Like, what an obnoxious, preface. And again, what these senators see these hearings as is to grandstand, is to put together sound bites, to be praised for resistance and standing up to MAGA, not for doing their job, not for doing their due diligence, not for being straight shooters. Michael Bennett ain't none of those things.
You believe, as the chairman of this committee believes, as the vast majority of members of our intelligence agencies believe, that Edward Snowden was a traitor to the United States of America.
Senator, if confirmed as Director of National Intelligence, I will work with you to make sure that there is not a...
So he just won't let her talk. He's not interested. Horse's ass. I do want to get, he says he absolutely is. Bennett goes on to say that Snowden is absolutely a traitor, but let's just see if we can get a little more of that, because I want to really put up the debunking of Michael Bennett, who's trying to embarrass and humiliate Tulsi Gabbard.
Social media, it's not a moment to propagate theories, conspiracy theories, or attacks on journalism in the United States. This is when you need to answer the questions of the people whose votes you're asking for to be confirmed as the chief intelligence officer of this nation. As my colleague said, this is not about you. It's about the people that serve
right. What a jerk. So I'm not going to I can't even watch that. It just turns my stomach. But again, the man that Michael Bennett calls a traitor, that many other Democrats and Republicans are calling a traitor is the man who did great service to our nation, a man who is a true patriot, who is truly brave. You know, I've said this many times that my definition of a patriot, and I think it's the right one, and I'll fight anyone who disagrees, is somebody who sacrifices for their country. So you go fight for our country in the military, you give up a comfortable existence, that's a sacrifice. I may not agree with the cause, I may not think it's righteous, but you still gave up something for your country. I give that a lot of, I give that a lot of respect. Edward Snowden gave up an awful lot. He was making a lot of money. I believe he was a contractor. I said he was working for the NSA. I believe he was a contractor. He was making well into the six figures. He totally ruined his life to tell us that we were being spied on, to tell us that our government was conducting illegal activity. I want someone as Director of National Intelligence who recognizes the service that Edward Snowden did. I want someone who is our Director of National Intelligence who doesn't believe in spying on every American without a warrant. Tulsi Gabbard is the right choice to be Director of National Intelligence. And there's so much more. She's going to respond to a Republican, Ted Budd, whom I had barely heard of. I think I mentioned the journalist from The Intercept who does a lot of videos. Ryan Grimm was saying he believes Ted Budd will, in fact, vote for Tulsi, but her nomination probably will not make it through confirmation. We'll see. Here's what her exchange with Ted Budd was. It's more polite, it's more respectful, and I think it gives you better insight into why Tulsi Gabbard should be our Director of National Intelligence.
What you're saying, false?
Yes. Did he betray a duty? Did he betray the trust of the American people? Which is, according to Merriam-Webster, that's the definition of a traitor.
Edward Snowden broke the law, and he released this information in a way that he should not have. He also acknowledged and exposed information that was unconstitutional, which drove a lot of the reforms that this body has made over the years to make sure that Americans' constitutional rights are protected.
Well, for what it's
So I want to stop it right there, or actually it stopped itself. How could you oppose her nomination? I really want to know, if you disagree with her as Director of National Intelligence, based on what? She just acknowledged that what Snowden did was critically valuable to our nation, to our people. So I'm totally confused as to what argument there would be. Now, that's not enough, right? I mean, well, it is enough, in my opinion, but there's more. I mean, this was a really bold pick by Trump. Why would you torpedo her? She doesn't just speak truth to the Democrats. Snowden's revelations of the illegal Obama program, the program he started, or he certainly expanded greatly. Maybe it was started under W, I'm not sure, maybe even before him. But a program that was largely and correctly associated with President Obama. Snowden exposed that. And Gabbard, supported Snowden, and Obama don't like it. Hillary doesn't like it. Hillary doesn't like her because she went after, because she left the DNC because it was putting a thumb on the scale for Hillary in 2016, and she decided to work for Bernie. But she doesn't only go after Democrats. She's not a partisan. In 2020, she said there was no justification by Trump for killing the Iranian general Soleimani. Qasem is how it's pronounced, I believe, Soleimani. She said it was like a war. It was an act of war. She said it made us less safe. I mean, look, she's really something. She's speaking truth to power. Whoever's in power, who else does that? And she was totally right. It was a terrible thing that the Trump administration did. Now, by the way, I give Trump a lot of credit for nominating her. This is someone who was harshly critical of an act he took. And he's like, yeah, I like her. She's bold. That's what I want as my director of national intelligence. And you know what? That's also what I want as director of national intelligence. You got to admit, Trump gets encomiums for that. All right, 240-242-5646. We're going to keep going a little longer. I think you can see just how good Tulsi is when you compare her to the previous director of national intelligence. There she is, Avril Haines. Now, the name was kind of vaguely familiar to me, so I looked her up because, I don't know. Maybe she had some sort of really impressive CV, and maybe Tulsi doesn't even look that good compared to her. Maybe there's somebody better out there. So I looked up Avril Haines, and I read, and this is going to be cursory. This goes from her Wikipedia page, but I think it's all correct what they have in there. She is an American lawyer. Now contrast that with Tulsi, who is an American military officer. She's a lawyer. She's never served in the military. She has been a functionary. She was the deputy national security advisor and then deputy director of the CIA under Obama. It's impressive, no question about it. She was deputy counsel to the president for national security affairs before that. So she just climbed the ladder. She impressed Obama. The bottom line, she did what Obama wanted her to do. She didn't impress any officer. She didn't impress a commanding officer or her professors or anything like that. I presume she was a good law student. I don't know. Smart. She was at Johns Hopkins. She went to Georgetown Law. I mean, that's impressive. What did she do that impressed Obama? Could we look at her record and say, oh yeah, she did some really good stuff. She was a positive influence. So here's what Wikipedia tells us. She worked closely with John Brennan, I think it was with the CIA, on how to make a policy on how to kill people. She was the person you went to determine whether you could lawfully incinerate somebody by a drone strike. So here's a comment from Shade. Shade, please call. You don't like Tulsi? You don't like someone who tells the president, who tells Trump that he did a terrible thing by assassinating a general? You don't like somebody who says that Edward Snowden did a great service to our nation? Why not? Tell me why not. You say it would be unwise to put her in a position of authority. Why not? Why would it be better to have somebody whose policy was to determine when you could lawfully incinerate someone by drone strike? And basically, it was always lawful. It wasn't like Avril Haines, unlike Tulsi, who said, no, the government needs to step back. The government doesn't just get to spy on you because it feels like it. Haines, by contrast, was instrumental in establishing the legal framework and policy guidelines for drone strikes, which made targeted killings all over the world. This is the Biden pick. Targeted killings all over the world, a normal part of U.S. policy. That's okay, right? That's okay. Democrats were perfectly fine with somebody who made targeted killings U.S. policy all over the world. Did she put any guardrails up? Did she say, no, we don't get to kill people willy-nilly just because some general or some informant tells us they're a member of Al-Qaeda? Did she put any guardrails up? Well, she said you can only do it if it's legal. You can only drone someone. You can only incinerate someone legally. But she didn't say what law you had to comply with. Kind of sounds a little like John Yoo, right? Remember John Yoo? He was the torture czar under W and Cheney W administration, where he said, hey, if the president does it, it's okay. The president can torture people, it's okay. It's not even torture. Well, it sounds like that's what Avril Haines said. You can drone people whenever you want. We're going to make it normal American policy as long as it's done lawfully, but there's no law that I can point to that tells you what to follow or not to follow. So according to Shade, the concern is our allies are scared that she would leak secrets. Well, the criticism of Snowden was that by telling us, by letting the American people know that we were being spied on, that we are being spied on, we made our troops less safe. No, not one death has been attributed to Edward Snowden. Not one botched operation has been attributed to Edward Snowden. So I don't take those concerns at all seriously. All right, so back to Haines, back to the predecessor, I guess the standard, right? We would at least expect, probably most of you would say, there's no way a Trump appointee, or I shouldn't say most of you, that's not fair, but the Democrats would say there's no way a Trump appointee could be anywhere near as good as any of the Biden-Harris picks, right? So let's just look a little more. So not only did Avril Haines make extrajudicial targeted killings U.S. policy when she was working for Obama, but what did she do when Trump took office? Well, you know what she did? She joined Antony Blinken at West Exec Advisors, a consulting firm with a secretive client list, which includes high-tech startups seeking Pentagon contracts. That's who Joe Biden picked to be director of national intelligence. Somebody who consulted for Palantir Technologies. They're a spy company. Palantir are these rocks, the seeing rocks that you can see all over Middle Earth that J.R.R. Tolkien, created. So they're like ways that you can spy on leaders, on presidents, on everyone, everywhere. That's who Avril Haines is. Somebody who doesn't see any limits on the power of governments to spy on you and anybody else. Contrast that with Tulsi, who believes firmly, clearly in the rule of law and will stand up to anyone, including Trump, including Obama, who violates what she believes, and I think correctly so, should be and is the law of the land. Haines knew her position smacked of corruption, smelled really bad. So before the hearings, when she was nominated for DNI, she scrubbed her resume. This is the fact that Joe Biden had a really bad director of national intelligence, the fact that he had corrupt Secretary of State, Antony Blinken, and also a bloody Blinken. The fact that his Secretary of Defense was, I always forget his name, Lloyd Austin, I'm sorry, also, flacked for, worked for, consulted with defense company corporations. That doesn't mean we should therefore let it go when Trump does the same thing. But that, there's fairness and fairness. If you're going to just simply wave a flag in front of, Haines and say, oh, welcome on board, but we're going to subject Tulsi to the most rigorous scrutiny, That doesn't sound right, does it? It doesn't sound like these are people that we should, have any faith in, meaning the Democratic Party. And again, the answer is Trump's no hero. Trump's problematic at best. And on his best day, he's very problematic. We got to go in a different direction, folks. We cannot continue to bounce back and forth like a ping pong ball between these two horrific, atrocious parties. Haynes confirmed 84-10. There was no question about her. The most corrupt insider. Somebody whose policies were horrific, who made us all less safe. And there was no debate even. Oh, yeah. Bernie asked her a few hard questions. All right, 240-242-5646. 240-242-5646. Just to be fair to Shade, he says, Snowden, I would have pardoned. Well, agreed. So that's another argument, certainly for Tulsi. She's not the only Trump appointee, nominee, I should say, who's running into some roadblocks. Let me play this little clip. Now, I was debating my little thumbnail, and I ultimately just wanted the free-for-all. It's easier for me not to put together a new thumbnail and all that. But I would have put a check where he was going to have a picture of RFK Jr. and a picture of Tulsi. And I was going to have a check over Tulsi and an X through RFK Jr. because I don't think RFK Jr. should be confirmed. I understand. Now, I was watching Glenn Greenwald. I'll play an exchange where RFK Jr. has with Senator Warren, Elizabeth Warren, which is kind of interesting. And it kind of devolved into this nasty talking over each other, yelling. But it started out pretty good, and I want to play some of it because I thought it was interesting. I would not vote for RFK Jr. I understand the Glenn Greenwald argument. I understand the Sagar and Genty, if you know who I'm talking about. These are people who do video, do live streams like I do or do podcasts like I do. And their argument, it's interesting because Genty's, I guess, a Republican, a libertarian. Greenwald's kind of libertarian too, but he's much more of a progressive. He's not really, I wouldn't really call him a libertarian. He wants government to step back in many cases, but he, I believe, is a strong supporter of, say, Medicare for all. And government should help people. They're both pretty much pro-peace, anti-war, so I give them credit for that. But their argument is basically, and I understand the argument, RFK Jr. is going to shake things up. At least he's critical of the big pharma. At least he wants Americans to be healthier, to eat healthier foods. Like we are obese. We have lots and lots of illnesses because we don't exercise enough, because we eat unhealthfully. Our lifestyles are very sedentary. So they're saying this is really good stuff. And I agree to that extent. But the guy, his record when it comes to, say, attacking vaccines is just crazy. Vaccines have saved possibly billions, hundreds of millions of lives. I mean, it really is extraordinary. Polio was a scourge when your grandmother was a kid. People would be crippled. That was not uncommon. You had 50 years before that, malaria. And, they knew there's a cure for malaria. Well, you just take, quinine, but malaria, yellow fever, smallpox before then. These were terrible, terrible diseases. And vaccines, people would die or their faces would be scarred. It's extraordinary what even just antibiotics have done. Now, all that, those lives being saved doesn't mean we have good quality of life. We need to do both, and we've been very good at preventing people from dying of diseases. We've been very bad at ensuring everyone has a decent quality of life. But I don't see how you can be director of Health and Human Services, Secretary of Health and Human Services, if you're that much of a skeptic, if you're that much in denial about the value of vaccines, and RFK Jr., what Greenwald said is, well, RFK Jr. said he's not going to stop the vaccine programs, and I think that's a fair point. He doesn't have a lot of power to stop it. But I think at some point you have to have someone who at least recognizes the value of Western medicine, no matter how badly it's been corrupted, it's been perverted by the all-powerful profit motive. But the thing is, that's not really RFK Jr.'s. If his soapbox was we need socialized medicine, the real issue here is Americans don't have access to health care, I would be, of course, all on board, notwithstanding even his criticism of vaccines. If he said, well, I just have a real problem because these vaccines are profit centers for these pharmaceutical companies, and they advertise drugs that don't help you, and they have an interest in promoting obesity so they can sell you Ozempic, and they have an interest in promoting high blood pressure so they can sell you a medication that targets high blood pressure. So I would totally get that, and I would agree with it. But just because there's so much corruption in the medical industry doesn't mean they haven't done some good things. So I would not vote for RFK Jr. By the way, I totally agree. Here's what Shade adds some more. RFK said Medicare Med Advantage now he retracted it as I'm reading this. Now maybe he didn't say it. I don't know. He's retracting his messages. He said Medicare Advantage initially costs Medicare enrollees more. It actually costs less, but ultimately costs more. Yeah, Medicare Advantage is horrible. It's Medicare disadvantage. Here's the back and forth with Warren I wanted to play for you, and then final words, and we'll call it a week. I'm hoping to have a guy I've been working with Code Pink join me next week. I actually wanted to have him on to talk about Tulsi. I'm not sure if he supports Tulsi. He had some positive things to say about Tulsi, but I'm not sure if on balance he even has taken a position. But I did want to get his take on Tulsi because he knows much more than I do about her. Here's and by the way, if he came out and said, yeah, here's why I don't support Tulsi. There's some issues with Tulsi. Tulsi has been, I believe, there's a vein perhaps of some Islamophobia in there, which I don't like. She is too pro-Israel, which I don't like. But she's so strong against regime change. She's been so, beyond what we already talked about, the Snowden issue, the assassination of Soleimani, her willingness to speak truth to power. She's a maverick. She went out and spoke to Assad. She was right. Our support for al-Qaeda against Syria was terribly, terribly wrong. This is what I heard Ryan Grim say. This is, again, in support of Tulsi. She was absolutely right. We should have been trying desperately to stop the civil war in Syria, to get concessions from Assad. But instead, all we did was arm al-Qaeda. All we did was allow Israel to bomb Lebanon and bomb Syria repeatedly. And Syria, like Gaza now, Syria is largely a wasteland. It's a desert. Like Libya now, it's a desert. I mean, there's a desert, obviously. There's deserts in those areas, but I mean, it's almost sterile. Life just isn't able to be supported there anymore because of American foreign policy. And Tulsi, to her everlasting credit, has been a strong, staunch opponent of those policies.
Kennedy, I want to start with something that I think you and I agree on, and that is that Big Pharma has too much power in Washington. You've said that President Trump asked you to, quote, clean up corruption and conflicts. Sounds great. You've said that you will, quote, slam shut the revolving door between government agencies and the companies they regulate.
I want to stop that for a second. So when you think about what she's saying, look at how Avril Haines leaves the Obama administration, where she was working at the CIA, where she was I think she was the deputy director of NSA, and then she goes to work for Palantir. I mean, who makes this stuff up? She goes to work for West Exec Med. So I would ask Elizabeth Warren, did you vote? Because I'm sure, did she vote for Avril Haines? Maybe she didn't. Some senators didn't. But if you're upset about the revolving door, and I think she is, like I think she's sincere, did you vote for Avril Haines?
So sounds great. So here's an easy question. Will you commit that when you leave this job, you will not accept compensation from a drug company, a medical device company, a hospital system, or a health insurer for at least 4 years, including as a lobbyist or a board member?
Can you just repeat the last part of the question? Can I commit
You're
to
not going to take money from drug companies in any way, shape, or form.
Who? Me?
Yes, you.
Oh. Yeah, I'm happy to commit to that.
Okay, good. That's what I figured. I said it's an easy question to start with. And I think you're right.
All right, so they agree. He's not going to leave government and work for Big Pharma. And contrast that with Howard Dean, who became a huge flack for, it was making $1 million a year before he died, working for lobbying for Big Pharma. By the way, I'm looking this up. Elizabeth Warren. So, I mean, folks, I don't know what you do with this. She did, in fact, vote to confirm Avril Haines. And I do think that's remarkable hypocrisy. She says she's against the revolving door, and I believe her. She says it's not right for government officials to go work for the very companies that they regulated when they leave office. That's very problematic. And you can see why. Because if you're supposed to regulate a company, but you think you'll get a great job offer from them, if you don't regulate them aggressively, then you won't regulate them aggressively. And if you're the company, you're like, yeah, we'll take on this hack, because it's certainly worth it to let everybody know that if you treat us with kid gloves when you're in government, we're going to make sure you get a nice silver lining when you come out. So if Elizabeth Warren is that upset, and I think she is, I really do, I'm not doubting it, how much hypocrisy then is there in her vote to confirm Avril Haines, who leaves government where she's in the defense side and then immediately goes to work for defense contractors? It's horrible. It's awful. We've got to move to a different party.
On this,
I don't think any of them want to give me money, by the way.
Let's keep going.
And he's right. He says they don't want to give me money. And he's right. They wouldn't. But that's to his credit. See, this is the Greenwald argument, which I share. The problem is he's a kook. I mean, the anti-vax stuff, he's just wrong about.
Because every American has the right to know that every decision you make as our number one health officer is to help them and not to make money for yourself in the future. So I want to talk more about money. I'm looking at your paperwork right now. In the past 2 years, you've raked in $2.5 million from a law firm called Wisner Baum. You go online, you do commercials to encourage people to...
By the way, when I was listening to this, I was like, does Warren... Now, I just pointed out the hypocrisy in her vote for Avril Haines for Director of National Intelligence, given her concern about the revolving door from government to big business and back. But I did want to find out when she criticizes RFK Jr. for getting legal fees, very significant fees for suing or finding clients who will sue Big Pharma. Is she taking money from Big Pharma? Does she trade stock? Right? Because that's a big issue that AOC has pointed out, and I think rightly so, that Democrats are trading stock based on insider information. And to Warren's credit, she's really fought against that. Now, I don't know, maybe she does still trade. I couldn't find evidence that she does, but I have found that she's really pushing the AOC bill to ban insider trading by Congress. And I praise her for that. That's good. She is walking the walk when it comes to that issue.
Wisnerbaum to join lawsuits against vaccine makers. And for everyone who signs up, you personally get paid. And if they win their case, you get 10% of what they win. So if you bring in somebody who gets $10 million, you walk away with $1 million. Now, you just said that you want the American people to know you can't be bought. Your decisions won't depend on how much money you could make in the future. You won't go to work for a drug company after you leave HHS. But you and I both know there's another way to make money. So, Mr. Kennedy, will you also agree that you won't take any compensation from any lawsuits against drug companies while you are secretary and for 4 years afterwards?
All right, so her question, I probably am very clear. She asked it very clearly. She is a lawyer. She said, you're not going to work for drug companies. Will you agree not to sue drug companies or refer patients to drug companies if you leave government? And when I first heard the question, I thought, okay, it sort of was a gotcha. Like, you made it easy for him. You said, you're not going to take money from Big Pharma. Now I'm going to make it a little harder and ask you if you'll sue Big Pharma and ask you to say you won't. I don't see why he should say that. What's the problem? Why is it I get it's a problem if you're supposed to regulate Big Pharma and then you leave and you work for them. That seems like a real problem because you'll get rewarded for treating them with kid gloves. You have an incentive to go easy on the people you're regulating. But what's the reason he shouldn't sue the Big Pharma? I don't have a problem. Honestly, I'm really trying to understand. It's not the same thing. If the companies that he regulates, that he's overseeing, hurt somebody, why shouldn't he sue them? That doesn't make sense to me. He's not taking money from them if he sues them. Well, he is taking money in a way, but they're not rewarding him. They're not paying him. So I don't see the problem there I don't see why he should agree not to sue drug companies.
Well, I'll certainly commit to that while I'm secretary. But I do want to clarify something because you're making me sound like a shill. I put together that case. I did the Science Day presentation to the judge on that case to get it into court.
Mr. Kennedy, hearing. Mr. Kennedy, it's just a really simple question.
So this is where I can't stand it. She says to him, you get 10% for referring some client. It's like, it's just a finder's fee. That's the way she characterized it. He said, that's not really true. I actually did real work on the case where I did get the 2.5 million or whatever. Maybe it was more than one, but maybe there was, I would assume, a class action of some sort. But he's saying, no, it wasn't just like I found a few people. I actually did legal work. And I'm sure he did. He is as Shade puts it, an ambulance chaser. He's done that, but he's also done a lot of environmental work too. His record as a lawyer is somewhat impressive. So I thought this line of questioning just didn't make sense to me. And I think Warren went off the rails there because she's just trying to draw a false equivalency. And this is how Democrats lose. Focus on the vaccine positions he's taken. And even there, he said, hey, I'm not going to stand in the way. I'm not going to stand in the way. I think at some point, if you express views that really are clearly, and I understand there's so much question about vaccines, right? People, Jimmy Dore has done a lot to poison the well against vaccines. Jimmy Dore's done a lot of great work. Don't get me wrong. And there certainly have been some issues with those COVID vaccines. My understanding is they absolutely saved lives, saved millions of lives. We had the highest, RFK Jr. said this, we had the highest death rate from COVID of any country in the developed world. That probably is true. There's some Eastern European countries that have very high COVID death rates that also had relatively low rates of vaccination. But we also had a low rate of vaccination. So it's not clear that one caused the other, but there's correlation. You can point to areas, you can point to correlations between certain low countries with low vaccine rates and high death rates from COVID. But even if you say with COVID, yeah, the vaccines weren't as effective as they were touted to be, and they weren't, they still were effective. They still saved some lives, a lot of lives. And, there's been a lot of search to find victims from those vaccinations, and I think they've been largely, but not completely, fruitless. So I think at some point, especially for a position that requires you to oversee health and human services, if you're going to be that skeptical as RFK Jr. has been of late of traditional Western medicine, the whole idea that we go into a lab and we put bacteria under a microscope and we see how we can kill that bacteria. We put a virus under a microscope and we see if there's any way to kill. The viruses are tough to kill. That type of science has proven to be an incredible boon for humanity. And if RFK Jr. doesn't get that, I don't think he should be confirmed as the Secretary of Health and Human Services. All that said, I understand a lot of people believe what he says about vaccines. And I'll make this final point. I don't want to argue with you, but why do people believe stuff when really the evidence doesn't support it? What's the reason for that? And it's so important that we understand this. It's because there's so much inequality, because there's so much exploitation of the poor and the working class by the tiny minority at the top. Economic inequality feeds conspiracy theories. If you don't want poor, struggling, working people to believe conspiracy theories, then you have to fight to tax the rich and guarantee everyone a decent life. And Democrats, like Republicans, have failed to do that. We need a different direction. I'll see you Monday. Have a great weekend.